Thank you very much. Just waiting for the slides. Okay. Yeah, so my name is Tjibbe Bouma. I'm the chairman of SPRINT Robotics, and I'm here this afternoon to tell you a little bit about our organization. For those of you who've roamed around on the exhibition floor, undoubtedly you have noticed that there's quite a few robotic solutions out there, which just shows that robotics is on the rise in our industry. And SPRINT Robotics is an organization that is founded back in 2015 to drive that acceleration of uptake of robotics for inspection and maintenance purposes. We are a global organization, a not-for-profit organization, and at the moment we have about 100 organizations, companies supporting us and making use of our services. So the objective of SPRINT Robotics is to achieve robotics for inspection and maintenance purposes on a very large scale. I think at the moment, for many applications, we still see that it is sort of a niche application, but there are many applications which are going mainstream now. And in this presentation, I will highlight a few examples of applications that are highly relevant for oil and gas, and in particular terminal applications. I think one of the key success factors and defining features of SPRINT Robotics is that we are an end-user driven organization. And that means that we always start with the added value of robotics from an end-user perspective. And we're in that sense not interested in the technology per se. It's all about the added value that the technology can provide. And that added value has multiple dimensions. Of course, there's the safety element in it. Hydrocarbons and people in their vicinity in principle are not a very good idea. So if we can take people away from hazardous areas, that will drive safety, and robotics can play an important role there. In the front of everybody's mind these days is always, of course, also environmental performance improvement by doing things more clever. In this session there's also a presentation, for instance, on on-stream tank robotics. If you can leave a storage tank in service, that will reduce the environmental impact of your inspection and maintenance program. And that is important these days. And then, of course, there's the cost element of it, which has two components. One is driving down the cost of doing the inspection and maintenance in the first place. And the other element of that is the increased uptime of your assets, which will actually result in more availability and thus more added value out of the assets that you have. Many of our support organizations, more support companies are global oil and gas majors and terminal owners. We decided that since this is a global industry, we needed to be global. So very soon after 2015, we started to expand also to North America. So we have a North American chapter. We have an Asia Pacific chapter these days operating out of Singapore. And we are at the cusp of opening up also a South American chapter, which was supposed to happen in 2021, but due to COVID, it was delayed by a year. This picture is sort of central to the way we look at how you drive robotic implementation. The only way to accelerate it is if you get alignment in the whole value chain. So simply put, there needs to be a business case for everybody involved in the implementation of robotics, because if one of the actors in the value chain doesn't have a business case, then basically your implementation breaks down. And so we've put this picture together to give you a bit of a feel for how that works from our perspective. So we start from the right-hand side, which is the end users, who actually have the actual needs for robotics and for the needs for inspection and maintenance. But they outsource most of the stuff to service providers, who in turn are dependent on technology providers to provide them with the technology they need. Sometimes, of course, this is integrated in one company, but behind that there's the supply chain in terms of developing and implementing these robotic solutions. All these needs a lot of money, so investors need to understand the business case as well. Otherwise, nothing will happen there. because everything needs to be pre-funded. And last but certainly not least, this is a highly regulated industry. So if regulators are not on board with applying robotics, then we are in trouble. And I think that is currently one of a significant bottleneck in deploying robots. And for instance, if you're flying drones, there's also regulations that you need to comply with. There's all sorts of safety regulations. There's technical standards that you have to comply with. So that the whole regulatory field is important. And the better we can get the message across to all actors in the value chain, the more rapid we will be able to do the change. So we do it with our full-time participants, our full participants, mostly oil and gas majors who support our organization and drive the agenda. So they are actually the organization that decide what we spend our resources on. And then we have a very large group of technology and service companies, about 80 of them, that make use of the services and make use of our networks to help accelerate this. And I think this is really a matter of rising the tide for all of us, so that robotics becomes a base case and not the exception that it often is. We kept growing throughout COVID, so we're now over 100, and you will see that the hockey stick will curve up this year again. Now we leave COVID behind us, so we're seeing a growing momentum in the industry for these kind of solutions, and that's a very encouraging sign. So what do? We were really focused on the deployment side of things, so we don't focus much on, let's say, over-the-horizon research. Our working areas are really how can we understand how we can get robots accepted and usefully applied. That means that we do that on an asset-focused basis. That means that we're not having action groups around drones or ground-based robots or something like this. No, we focus on certain types of assets. So we have the action group around storage tanks, which thinks about useful applications for robots in storage tanks, whatever they may be. We do the same for pressure vessels, process piping, and then we have a group that focuses on what we call remote operators. So that's all applications where you actually want to do surveillance or inspection or maintenance tasks and don't want to have humans in the loop and want to do it as a minimum remote controlled way. But often also in automated ways, and that's where the new generation of spots and quadrupeds that are now becoming available play a role. And then there's some new areas where the capabilities of robots are becoming so strong now that we felt that we needed to put a special focus. One element is the cleaning and fabric maintenance side of things. Robotics have started very much in our industry as devices that collect data, so in that sense almost like roaming sensors. But we see more and more that the robots are becoming more capable of actually executing tasks, where in the manufacturing industry that's what robots have been doing from day one. In the service side of things, that's only now coming into its own, and that's cleaning tasks, coating tasks, those kind of things. Clean energy, of course, in everybody's mind. The margins on clean energy production are way off what they are in the oil and gas industry. So what we see is that that industry is highly efficient, becoming highly efficient in executing inspection maintenance at a much lower cost. And we'll see also more of that, in our opinion, in oil and gas industry, because those funds will have to be used for clean energy initiatives as well. So clean energy is certainly something that's very much on our minds. Funding, I showed to you in the diagram, funding is really important. And of course data is front and center to everything that we do. So we're also looking into what AI can do to help us in this respect. And then we have a whole list of events which I won't bore you with, but a lot of what we do is communication. So we organize all sorts of events, roadshows, what have you, to make sure that many more people get exposed to robotics, because if you're not familiar with robots, then you may not want to deploy them. An important element which is also related to safety and also the regulatory side of things is guidelines. So we need to demonstrate that we can deploy a robot in a safe manner. And if everybody is developing their own methods for that, that's not very helpful in terms of acceleration of the market. So we try to, as SPRINT Robotics, provide this alignment in this respect. And we have developed a number of guidelines, which again are asset owner-driven guidelines, so that we at least see similar modes of deployment and operation with different end users, which makes everybody's life easier, because then also suppliers and service providers know what the general operating procedures are for deployment. And we try also to map out the future. So we have a SPRINT Robotics roadmap that everybody can download from our website if you are interested, where we try to map out what the trends are in robotics. We update it on a regular basis. And we basically look at, well, what's the technological readiness of certain applications and what is the business readiness, because the biggest bottlenecks at the moment are in the business readiness side, not so much in the technology side of things. So then very quickly, because there's in this session also in-depth presentations on these subjects, but so some applications that come to mind when we're thinking about terminals and tank storage. Of course, there is opportunities in out-of-service tank storage inspection, and so you can further automate the inspection of a tank while still taking it out of service. But if you really want to have a step change in the way you approach tank inspection, then online storage tank inspection comes into view. For a certain subset of tanks, this is now very well possible. But of course, this requires also a different approach to inspection, and I think there's quite a healthy landscape of service providers now out there that can actually provide this kind of services. It's really a matter of creating more industry uptake, and I would encourage everybody to look closely into the advantages of on-stream tank inspection, because it is really a game changer, and I'm personally convinced that this is the way that tank inspection will happen in the future. Robotics for pressure vessels, there's also some presentations later on that. So sending people in confined spaces is a bad idea. We do it nevertheless in the industry on a very regular basis. Robotics can really help you pushing down the number of tank inspection of confined space entries, and thus make our industry safer, more efficient, and also robots in general do a better job at collecting information than we humans can. And then, of course, there's a lot of piping in tank terminals in general. So piping inspection, there's a whole series of drones that can do visual inspection, but also wall thickness measurements from the inside, from the outside. So that's another area where there's a lot of development at the moment. And last but not least, I already said, we're moving from inspection to fabric maintenance. There's a growing fleet of robots that can do all sorts of cleaning tasks in very unfriendly environments, but also for instance, blasting and coating of tanks. And yeah, that's really taking off, and it's a very efficient and high quality way of doing things. And then finally, the remote operators that either come as drones or as quadrupeds or as wheeled vehicles. And we see a lot of development there. So instead of doing operator rounds, send robots around as a roaming sensor to do surveillance and inspection tasks, and keeping people out of harm's way. But also have a much more close surveillance of your environment. So this is really starting to take off now, and there's a good range of robots, some of them ATEX certified, that are now able to do these tasks. So what are the trends? Before I slowly come to the end of the presentation, I'm not sure how I'm doing on time, but when we started the organization back in 2015, it was all about how do we get robots available that are up for the job that they were designed for. In the past 7 years, that has really changed. There is now a very good range of robots that are really fit for purpose. Some of them you can see around on this exhibition floor. So the momentum or the attention is really shifted from now we have these robots, how do we embed them in the workflows that we actually have in our day-to-day practice. And that is sometimes very painful because to effectively deploy these robots, we really need to have to do the operate in a different way. So we need to change our practices, and as we all know, our industry is quite conservative in that respect. So that's a big task to get that done. So scaling is very important. So a robot can be technically capable, but if it's not available in the area where you run your operations, it doesn't do much good to you. And for day-to-day deployment, you really have to have a local ecosystem of these robotic service provider. And then we see that there's more and more software becoming available to do robotic fleet management. So where up till now it was really somebody operating one robot, we now see more and more that whole fleets of robots are starting to be deployed, and they are controlled from a central location, which sometimes can be very remote from the area where you're actually deploying the robot. So those platforms are becoming more and more mature, so they are for robotic control, but also for collecting all the data and making sense of all the data so that you get value out of it. So if we look at what's on the horizon, or sometimes already quite close, well before the horizon, there's a big effort in what we call normally unattended facilities. So a lot of facilities are become not human attended, and that can only be possible if you have the sensors and the robots to actually take care of those assets. And of course, the ultimate goal there for some of those assets at least is that sort of the asset becomes the robot, a fully controlled, self-thinking and self-managing system. And that's probably not as far away as we may think that it is. Well, data is on everybody's mind, so that's a clear trend. I think we have only started to scratch the surface. Data exchange is a massive issue. There's very little data standards. Data security is a massive issue which prevents us from doing more with robotics, so there's a lot of hurdles that we need to overcome. Autonomy is becoming better and better. I already mentioned the robotic fleet management, but that will become much more mature and will go well beyond managing a few robots, but will go into managing whole fleets of robots. Digital twins, so having a digital representation of the physical asset that you have out there, and using that to collect all the data and manage the asset that you have. And last but not least, it's really also becoming an enabler for the energy transition in multiple ways. In the, let's say, in the legacy economy, in the oil and gas related economy, it's really a driver to further reduce the costs. And many companies are now starting to invest in renewables, and renewables is not just wind turbines and solar panels, that's also synthetic fuels. Hydrogen economy is going to be very important, so we'll see a large impact of robots also in those kind of applications. Yeah, just before I round off, I would like to draw your attention to the Sprint Pavilion, where we have a couple of our Sprint members exhibiting on the other side of the exhibition hall. And the Sprint Robotics Innovation Trail, where some other members of the Sprint community have their own booths, and yeah, I would encourage you to go there and have a look and see if you can get to some more knowledge on robotic deployments and what is possible these days, because it's really fast moving. Last but not least, we also have a specific robotics conference for inspection and maintenance. So that we have a global inspection and maintenance robotics week in Amsterdam in September of this year. And I would like to leave you with this picture. I would really encourage you to go there. There, the whole global community around inspection and maintenance robotics will gather. And if you want to learn more about that subject, visit that conference and visit the exhibition, and I hope to see you there. But before that, we have a very interesting session this afternoon where you can already see some of these applications. So I will leave it at that, and thank you very much for your time and attention.